Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ecology. So this week we've got another amazing, super exciting guest. We've got Dr. Tim Lewis, he's got a PhD in wildlife ecology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he studies a wide range of animals from turtles to domestic dogs. His classes include the biology of dogs, neuroecology, ecology, natural history, and evolution. He's a professor of biology at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. He's an award-winning teacher and he gives talks about dog biology all around the US. And he's recently published his book, Dog Biology, From Gonads Through to Guts to Ganglia. And he lives with 3 border collies. So hello, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, we're very, very excited to talk to you. So can you just tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are in terms of your journey with dogs and
Yeah, I did not grow up in a household with dogs. So for me, it was it was a kind of a thing that happened later in life. Uh, my wife and I came home from a wedding, and there was this dog waiting outside our house like he had been there his whole life. And we tried to get rid of shoo, shoo, go away, whatever. We lived out in the country. There was no way to go to. And he just hung around. And so we started feeding him. And 2 days later, he was in the house on our bed sleeping. And he kind of took over. And we really kind of fell in love with having dog activities and doing things with him. We went to a canine good citizen class, and we're going to have a dog. We better learn something about the dogs. So started as an adult in a very ignorant place. Um, then we got Beaker taught us what a dog was. We got another couple of dogs through, and by the time we were into our third-ish dog, um, we were dog people. As in, you go buy the car, well, it's going to fit my dogs or not. If it doesn't fit my dogs, I'm not buying this car.
Mhm.
You go look to buy a house, and where's my dog going to live? Not where am I going to live? Pretty soon we're neck deep in that. And my wife she has a business where she does teaching dog agility and dog freestyle dance. And I was doing a lot of turtle work. And now we're well into my career. And I went to this dog camp. My wife got invited to teach at a dog camp in Vermont, in northeastern United States. And um, we went there, and I'm just like this stray guy who's just eating food and having a good time. And I'm listening to all these dog owners, 150 dog owners there, and they're saying crazy stuff about their dogs. And I'm like, excuse me, that's not right.
Hmm.
No, 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 that's not right. So I went to the camp director and I said, how about I give a talk on dog biology? And you could just see her eyelids droop from, sad boredom. Yeah, fine. You want to give a talk? If you're lucky, 15 people will show up, and that'll be great. You get 15 people, I'll let you do 2. Okay, so I gave a talk, and 15 people were there, and I was like, that's great. 2 nights later, the next one comes up. There were 50 people there. I was like, whoa, these people want to know about dog biology. So I started giving talks there, which got me invited to going all over. And I was giving a talk at a conference, and they were like, hey, people are asking for your book. And I was like, I don't have a book. And they said, yeah, that's the problem. So you got to go write one. So I got asked to write my book. That led to more talks and teaching classes on dog biology. And here I am today.
Cool, cool. That's really interesting journey. And yeah, it's not something I suppose that yeah, when people get dogs, they don't really necessarily understand or learn about the biology and stuff. So it's super, super interesting. Um,
I,
second.
I was just gonna say it's like people have kids and they don't learn about human biology and
Mm,
they say crazy
yeah.
things, and I want to teach them a class as well.
Yeah.
And you can have a wonderful relationship with a dog and not understand the biology, but you'll have a better relationship with a dog if you do understand the biology.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And then can you kind of talk a little bit about like the biology of different breeds and how different selection for traits have carried some interesting but perhaps worrisome kind of traits as well. So can you kind of go into a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually the topic most on my mind these days. Now, first of all, you said talk a little bit. I think you already know I can't do a little bit. So I will do what I can here. Um, they I think to kind of in a bigger sense, people get dogs and they forget that they're dogs, and then dogs are wolves. This is genetically, they're a wolf. They're the neotenous or the child form of a wolf. We selected to get something we could live with, or they self-selected. It's a whole different ball, a whole different thing to think about is how we or they started this whole domestication process. But we started to say, hey, if I start selecting for certain traits, I can get a guard dog. I can get a dog that helps me procure food. I can get a dog that just keeps me company. And we started to select for these very specific traits, and different breeds have those. I started reading AKC breed standards, which is the American Kennel Club breed standards for dogs. And there's this incredible nuanced kind of language in there, such as, independent dog, or does well with the family but not with strangers. We selected for those traits. Those were really perfect for certain situations. In other places, we selected for, I have border collies. We selected there, in that case, for a dog that can have a pretty good on-off switch and can go out and independently work smaller livestock using sight rather than mouth, because you'll damage the livestock. So there we select for those very specific traits. And much of behavioral tendencies have genetic influences. Now, that was a whole bunch buried in there, and I'll come back to it if you want. But we start selecting for these packages, and then you and I wouldn't, but a lot of times people who get a dog get surprised that, wait a minute, my dog just sits here and does nothing. Well, yeah, you got a King Charles Spaniel bred to sit on your lap and keep you company. If that's not what you're looking for, if you're looking for a guard dog, that was not your best choice. I was in a pet store. My wife and I were in a pet store, and we were getting, I think we were getting dog toys, and ran into this guy, pretty big guy, tall guy, who had his child in a child seat kind of perched on his back. And this was a toddler, just, months old. And he was there with his partner. And she said, "Oh, we're very excited. We've got this new baby. We just got our first dog." And I'm thinking, lab, or some maybe lab might be a little energetic. How about a golden retriever? Something that's just loves people. And they said, "Oh yeah, we got a Jack Russell Terrier." And my wife and I looked at each other. We're thinking, this is not a starter dog, not to start with a little baby. You need to understand what that dog was bred for. So all that to illustrate, get back to the point of, we selected for certain packages of traits, which makes great sense for the job the dog was bred for. And then we treat dogs in general like they're humans, and breeds as if they're all the same but look different. And the reality is they have very strong behavioral differences. And most is probably too strong a word. A lot of the complaints people have about their dogs is they didn't think about what the breed was done for. So it was made for. So you look through those breed characteristics and, was bred to be independent. Why doesn't my dog need me more? It was bred to be independent.
Yeah.
We forget those behavioral traits are so frequently genetic. And then at least century and a half of breeding for those traits. I just took a long circle. Did that get where you wanted to go?
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. I think, Angelique, you wanted to comment on that first before
Yeah. I think I've seen like a lot of studies actually showing that people choose dogs based on looks. Not as, that's obvious, but it's always nice to know we're kind of making the right assumption. But maybe comment a little bit on nature versus nurture. There's a lot of opinions about that, nature versus nurture. And then kind of secondly to that is, can you train a dog out of their genetics?
Oh my gosh, two of the best questions. We're here for 4 more hours, is that right?
Yeah. It's gonna be a 5-parter.
Yeah. So These are fantastic questions, and I want to make sure I come back to that training past genetics. Nature versus nurture is a little hard to study. I'll give you the human example first. In order to distinguish what is nature versus nurture in humans, the only really good way to do it is to take a pair of identical twins at birth, separate them at birth, and put them in different environments. Parents are really not keen about that. Oh, look, I just had identical twins. No, you can't have one of them for experimentation. But that's really what you need. You need a perfectly controlled study. You'd have to do the same thing with dogs. You would have to take, and you can look at a litter of puppies and go, they all look the same. They must be identical twins and triplets and quadruplets. And they're not. You would have to do the genetic tests to see if they're actual identical twins, meaning the eggs split in the process after fertilization versus multiple eggs being fertilized at once. So you'd have to first find those identical twins, and you'd have to separate them into different environments, and you'd really want to control the different environments because there's thousands of variables, and science likes to work on one variable at a time. It's messy. So the short answer is the way we look at that is we look at the variance in a trait, height. How many meters tall are you? How many centimeters tall are you? And how much is, we get a large sample and we try and factor in all these different environmental factors, and we try and look at the variance in height in that case, or in dog aggressiveness or spots on the dog. We look for the variance in it and compare large sample sizes to look at how much of that variance shows up in siblings and parents and other genetic lineages versus random dogs, random people, random whatever we're looking at. That takes a lot of time. And what you get is something like, as an example, 65% of this behavior is genetic and 35% is environmental. What does that mean? It means 65% of the variance came from genetics. We don't know what else it means. So that expression in difference could be really big or really small. So that's vague. So already as a scientist, I'm kind of jumping the question going, well, not really sure. It's the safe thing to say is every trait probably has some genetic influences and some environmental influences. Now, the obvious different ones are like tail docking. That's not genetic. That's a human manipulation. But otherwise, if you're talking about what shows up in a litter, everything has some genetics and some environmental characteristics. And then at different times in the life, those play a different role. So if you're looking at ramping back down from arousal, whatever you want to mean by arousal, it involves the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands. And that system trains better if you get it as a puppy and start working on it than as you do as an adult. So all of those things mess it up. So you can have lots and lots of debates about what's more genetic and what's more environmental, because it's a tough thing to answer. And go back to height or body size. Let's go to body size in dogs. If you get poor nutrition as a puppy, you do get a smaller frame, even though the genetics called for a larger frame. So you can have an environment having a huge impact on these genetic traits. So yes, you're going to get a lot of good debates, but the thing of it is, there are genetic influences even on behaviors. And people will often say, well, yeah, coat color's fine, but not behavior. My dog is peaceful because I trained it so well. No, there's going to be a significant genetic component in that, and we can show that by just doing selective breeding experiments, which is how when they took wild foxes and selectively bred for the most sociable, 25 generations, you get a really sociable fox. Obviously, behavior has a strong genetic component. Nobody's surprised when a herding dog runs out and circles around the sheep with nobody having showed it the book. Yeah. Strong genetic component to the behavior. Can you override it? The reason the prefrontal cortex exists in the brain, the evolutionary reason, is to override genetics. It's to allow you to learn from your environment. The answer is yes, you definitely can train past genetics. How far? That's the biggie. Can you take, we'll get to the most touchy one in a minute, but can you take a trait? I can't train away my dog's inability to fly, right? There's no training in the world is going to fix that. If my dog is shyer as a temperament, it's shy, it's reclusive, I can make it less reclusive, but I'm not going to turn it into an extrovert. You can move the dial, but you can't swing the dial. It's not a blank slate. It is absolutely not a blank slate. So people will then ask me, and I'll just go right to it because it's kind of a hot topic anyway, is can every aggressive dog be taught not to be aggressive? And the answer is theoretically, every aggressive dog could be made less aggressive. Is less aggressive enough for the situation they're going to be in? I don't know. And it requires the perfect trainer. It might require the perfect or just an excellent trainer who's only available. 1% of all trainers could have fixed this dog. If you could pair this dog with that 1% of trainers, you could make substantial differences. But you're never going to take the wolf out of the dog. That's the basic software it's got in it. And the prefrontal cortex exists to generally allow you to adapt. I can learn not to steal food from my neighbors, even though that was what I was wired with, right? Primates are really good at swiping food, especially chimpanzees, which are our closest relatives, really good at swiping food. I can learn not to do that. I can learn not to punch someone in the face because I was already fairly nonviolent. Could you take a really aggressive one? You can dial it back, but can you make it zero? The evidence seems to be you can't completely reverse those genetics, but you can move the dial. Can you move it far enough? Yeah, most of the time, sure. How was that?
Yeah, no, I have so many like thoughts and questions as you're talking. So yeah,
Fire away.
So I definitely noticed that when I've got border collies, and Shelties and now Pomeranian, but I used to live with my ex's bulldog as well, and he had never really been socialized with other dogs for the first couple of years, and just seeing like that difference in personality between the border collie and the bulldog, they might as well have been two completely different species. Like the bulldog just wanted to start fights with my male border collie who's lying behind me. You could see he would get a kick out of it, and you would see he would enjoy it. Whereas my male border collie hated the bulldog, like hated him.
Yeah, and that enjoyment, I just want to jump in real quick. That's a dopamine hit, right? There are other neurotransmitters involved. It's never as simple as one, but we can just refer to it that way, recognizing there are other neurotransmitters. When we selected bulldogs to do what they do, that means we selected for wiring that gets reward neurotransmitters for doing those things. So he does get a kick out of it, gets a real chemical kick out of it. My herding dogs get a real chemical kick out of moving things in a direction and bringing them together. It is literally, that is what the wiring is.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, you can change the behavior, but it took me about a year to do, and a lot of management and a hell of a lot of training. And the bulldog still was never like properly, you could see it was always override. Those genetics would always kind of override. And I think he'd always have to be managed in certain situations.
Yeah. And you're raising what is like my current sermon area. What I want to keep emphasizing to people is you wouldn't expect them to do the same. You wouldn't expect the same personality out of those dogs. You shouldn't be surprised. You should go. And does this mean all bulldogs act one way? No, and not all border collies act one way. But you get a predisposition toward a set of behaviors modified by the environment they're raised in, and how consistently you train, right? You're a good trainer. You can train a dog in a year. And somebody who's not consistent, take a lifetime.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of like, so we are in the dog sports world, like we do agility and search and rescue and all that kind of stuff. So obviously when we are selecting our next puppy to compete with, we're looking at like high drive dogs, and we work with a lot of like high drive dogs and stuff. But like, how does that affect their temperament in terms of like other elements of like personality? Because you'll see, say, like show line border collies, for example, being, typically really a lot more placid. You see them in the crufts show ring, you know, and they're generally like a lot heavier and so on compared to, say, the higher drive dogs.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And there's multiple parts to a temperament, right?
Mhm.
Drive is part of it. There are lines of border collies. So I'm going to go with my example. We have 3 border collies, and they really good at agility. My oldest one, who's almost 16 now, sleeping over there. She came in first in AKC Nationals one year in her class. I mean, she's really good agility dog. She comes from a line with a really good off switch, where because we were looking, saying, well, 99% of the time the dog is in our house with us and 1% is out there running agility courses. We can't forget the 99%. There are plenty of agility dogs out there that are 99% good on the agility course and 1% good in the house. And those are also genetic lines, right? You can have breed lines, but even within the breeds, family lines of these behavioral traits and these behavioral traits. It really does matter if a breeder is consistent and a good breeder and breeds for certain characteristics. You can get lines that are high drive, low drive, high drive with a good off switch, high drive with no off switch, lots of different variations, which is why what the breeders do or makes such a big difference. It's why it's such a gamble with a mixed breed. On the other hand, you tend to come to the middle on mixed breeds. You don't get the extreme behaviors, which is really comforting to go, hey, I got average on a lot of things here, and that's a wonderful dog to have for whatever it is I'm doing. So don't hear me as being pro breed or anti breed. My point is that there's sub breeds, there's sub lines, just as you wouldn't be surprised. This comes from a herding line. Great, it's going to be a little more herding than show dog, and it's going to have a little bit different body structure. And then within those, there's going to be lines that are better for the personality I want, and lines for the personality you want. If I were the king of the forest, and believe me, I'm not even the king of my household, let alone my forest. That would be Wish, who's the queen of the household. That's the 16-year-old border collie.
Yeah.
I heard a phrase somebody said. I'm absolutely stealing this. They said, I used to own Aussies and Shelties, and then I was owned by one border collie. And I think it kind of catches it. If I were the king of the forest, I would make breeders advertise for certain personality traits, and I would make people aware that you can get more of the personality temperament you want if you know what to ask for, and you can look for it. It's not, here are 7 puppies, they're all the same, and whatever I do in my household will fix it. Those are 7 puppies with 7 different personalities and 7 different genetic characteristics. And then what you do in your household is going to make a difference. But if people would select more for personality instead of looks, that would be amazing. Because so many dogs, for example, in the urban environment, they're not taken for their tolerance of an urban environment. They're taken for, as you said earlier, Angelique, they're taken for their looks, and then they don't fit. So it's the same in horse lines, right? This came from this horse, which came from this horse, which came from this horse. I know that horse line. This one gets out of a starting gate fast. This one can't race, but it's great on the trail. This one, you don't want it for either, but if you're just gonna have a horse in a pasture, this is the family line you want.
Yeah.
My core message as a biologist is biology is everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wish we could get through to like pet dog owners, like this information before they go out and get their cockapoo that they think is just going to lay on the couch all day long, or their working line Springer Spaniel. I mean, the number of clients I get that like their dogs they get a Cocker Spaniel and they come to puppy class and they've got no idea that they've got a working line one. I'll say, like on Zoom, we do the first session on Zoom, and as they send their photos through the puppies, I'm like, oh, you've got a working line Cocker, and they're like, a what? And they've got absolutely no idea. And they've got no idea of even the differences between show lines and working lines, because that in itself with some breeds is like a massive, massive difference. Again, in terms
So I'm going to ask both of you this question, each of you separately. I'm curious. Do you, is it okay I get to ask questions? Because I'm gonna.
of course.
Um, how much of the behavioral problems you run into, how much of that do you think is mismatched because they didn't pay attention to what they were
Yeah.
getting versus this is a problem dog with a problem behavior set?
So I think it's for me, it's like it's a combination of people not understanding the dog that they've got. Like for instance, I had a lady the other day who had got themselves a Labradoodle because she heard that they were used for guide dogs. So therefore she assumed that every Labradoodle was born to be like a guide dog, you know. So and so she was flabbergasted when her 7-month-old Labradoodle is like jumping up and stealing food and biting them, and she couldn't get over it. Like, so there's that. I think there's a lack of
Right.
education. I also find as well dogs' needs just aren't being met on like a
Mhm.
daily basis as
Yeah.
well. I find if a dog's needs are met, a lot of the time behavior problems massively reduce. So yeah,
Right.
so that's for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me as well, the large majority, there's been so many times where I've just sat there and I've thought, this is just, you guys don't fit. It's really difficult for you to meet your dog where they need to be met. And like, you know, it is your responsibility, but actually both your lives would be so much easier and so much better if you got a different dog or that dog went to a different home that suited them
Mhm.
better.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not
Yeah.
always the reality, but yeah.
I think as well, like obviously me being from the UK, the pet dog culture there is very different from South
It
Africa.
is.
It's a
Yeah.
huge, like I think South Africa is still very behind in terms of
Very, yeah.
training, and it's still very commonplace for people to just not walk their dogs here. Like they have, you
Yeah,
know,
no.
big
They don't
plots,
do training,
they
don't
don't do
walk, the dogs get
training.
left out in the
Um,
yard.
yeah, and they'll be
Yeah.
like, you know, there's pit bulls and they'll escape and, you know,
Yeah.
themselves into trouble and stuff. And yeah, there's a real lack of education here, way more than in the UK and in
Yeah.
the US.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but my next question, going back to biology and genetics. I just, so this is also a problem when people just look at physical, like the looks, like the phenotype when they select for traits, because sometimes you can accidentally also breed another trait, right? So thinking, this is like going back a couple of years to uni, but like you could select like a behavioral trait and that could also change, for example, coat color, you know, with the melanin and that, you know, that whole link. So I don't know, maybe comment on that a little bit. As far as I know, there aren't a lot of studies looking at that in dogs. I might be wrong, but yeah.
I'm go a couple of different ways here. I hate to say this, I want you to do that again because I started
Okay.
answering in my head and then went, I don't think that's what she's asking. Try that again.
No, and that makes sense for me because my brain is also like going here
Yeah,
and there.
exactly. And I was like, I'm going here, I'm going here. Wait, whoa, 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 time's out. So let's try that
Okay,
again.
okay, going back. Okay, so traits, you might select one trait and then inadvertently it affects another trait. So you've now kind of changed both things, even
Yeah.
though you were focusing on the one.
Yep.
And yeah, so just obviously a lot of breeders might just select for how the dog looks and, you know, might not focus on the behavior, but inadvertently, in theory, they could be changing more than just the looks.
Sure. So it did go the direction I was thinking.
Okay, okay.
And I feel good about it. So I want to tell you more than you want to know.
No,
Yeah, let's
impossible.
do this. So let's be really overly simplistic, and then I'm going
Yeah,
to complicate it a little. Let's
yeah,
imagine there's a gene for a trait that you're interested in, and there's another trait that has nothing to do with it. Those might be on the same chromosome. So within your cell, your DNA is in packages, and you get a certain number of packages. And you know, it's the little piece of trivia I forgot to look up for dogs. I could do it real quick. It's 70 something, if I recall correctly. we'll look at I know I'm wrong on whatever the number is,
Okay.
but let's just go. It's a lot.
Okay.
If that trait is on the same chromosome, you can select for this trait and drag along another trait that's unrelated. They just happen to be physically, geographically close. And because you selected for this, you get this one. And geographically, the closer they are on that string of DNA. So picture this in you, your strands, you have a total of 2 meters of DNA in every one of your trillions of cells. And then that's chopped up into a bunch of pieces. Those are the chromosomes. And traits didn't select like all the colors are on chromosome 13 and all the behaviors are on chromosome 26. They're scattered all over. They're scattered all over because evolutionarily that lets all the combinations ultimately get mixed into the gene pool and sampled by nature over time. So that's the best evolution. So you get a lot of unrelated traits. So I can drag this trait that I want, get foot size that's different because they happen to be on the same chromosome. So that's one problem that complicates it. I wanted this trait and I got this other thing with it. The other thing that happens is genes don't work one gene for foot size and one gene for and one gene for. It's the way we like to think about it. It's a good mental model. But the reality is, in humans, for example, there are 20,000 genes that make about 80,000 proteins, meaning this gene makes this stretch and then another gene modifies it, another gene modifies it, and then they take this basic unit and package it over here. And there's a whole lot of modification, and some of those genes are just on-off switches. And you might select for this thing over
Yeah.
here and not get the on-off switch with it, and now you have it. So the genes are interacting in lots of unpredictable ways that we don't have nailed down yet. When we started doing genome projects where we could code out every single base pair for the DNA, we were like, oh my gosh, there's billions here, and we have to decipher that code. And
Yeah.
we get parts of it, and 20 years from now, 10 years from now, it's pretty fast. Computers are good. We might be able to go, the locus on chromosome 43 right here does this trait as long as this on-off switch is in that position and this other protein does that. That's what you're looking at. So as you play with genetics, you get a lot of unanticipated consequences because in nature, ultimately that leads to a more diverse evolutionary pool that can handle changing environments. And in this whole breeding idea is just so contrary to what happens in nature and evolution, right? Every organism is just a one-time packaging of genes. The Tim Lewis package of genes will never exist again. Yet on average, half of me is in my sister and half of me is in my brother. So collectively, I'm out there, but there's no package like me ever again. Never before, never again. Even an identical twin is going to have some differences. So that works in nature. And then we try and breed. We're like, well, let's pick for this and this and this. And it's not like a car where you can say, I want this transmission, I want these headlights, and I want this steering wheel. You're going, I'll take the steering wheel package, which happens to include the spare tire and the Coke color, and the car color. It's just way too messy. So why does it happen? It happens because genetics is not so neat and tidy. And we would love it to be neat and tidy, but it don't work that way.
Mm. Very interesting. And in terms of like the dog's brain, like specifically like suppose the emotional brain, as we deal with behavior problems a lot, like what similarities and differences does the dog's brain compare to say the human's brain, for example?
Okay. I'm gonna answer your question and then I'm gonna tell you why I want you to think about it differently.
Okay.
Okay. What the main difference in mammalian brains between our brain and so that all mammalians share a basic brain pattern. We're doing functional MRIs now, and we can look at the routing that's going on. And the basic routing in a mammalian brain, the vast majority of it's the same. I need routing from the brain to run my heart. I need routing from the brain to run my kidneys. I need routing from my eyes to do something. Now, when you take in information, let's just say you took in something you saw, your brain, if it's not in crisis mode, as in fight or flight, if there's the whole 8/10 of a second to think about something, it's taking that visual imagery. So I'm seeing you guys on my screen. At the same time, I'm seeing like the stone work that's behind Angelique, and that looks very much like what I have in my basement, which is where I actually have my home bar, which makes me think of alcohol, which makes me think of what cocktail I want to have, or do I want to, and my brain goes on and on and on. That's the human brain. A dog, those are the associative parts of our cortex. And pretty soon I'm thinking of rock walls that I climbed as a kid. And then I'm smelling those. And oh, I remember that's where I saw that peregrine falcon. And right, that's how our brains work. A dog brain doesn't have anywhere near the number of connections and synapses in those associative areas that we have. In humans who have brain problems, and we can really kind of check, what that tends to do is strip away associations. So a dog would look and say, I see eyes, I see your face. Oh, you're a face I recognize. What are my emotions associated with you? Not, and there's a stone wall, and there's a stone wall, and I remember a stone wall when I was a kid. Unless something traumatic happened along that wall, then you start to get repeat behaviors. But there's not a lot of associative processing, it's more immediate processing. Here's my environment. Is there anything risky or non-rewarding or rewarding about my environment that's around me? This face gives me food. I'm going to hang with it. Probably, and not just the face. Dogs are much more olfactory, so it also knows this. This is Tim. This is Tim, and he's angry. This is Tim, and he's not angry. So they're picking up all that, but they're not going to. Best we can tell, they're not going to go, hey, I remember 6 weeks ago Tim was angry and he was eating bread, and I wonder if there's bread around. But they might go, every time I smell this, Tim gets really mad, I should back off. So certainly they can associate, but it's not 7 levels of association or 20 levels of association. Does that part make sense so far? Because then I'm going to mess you up if you'll let me.
Okay, go on.
Yeah.
You talked about the brain. There are 5 brains. And nobody, this is going to sound like, I got to be careful there. There are 5 brains, and what part of it comes down to how you want to define a brain, okay? If you talk about a functional unit of neurons that can do some complex things and have some neurotransmitters associated with them, you have 5 brains. The first brain to evolve is the enteric brain, which is in your gut. And many of the neurotransmitters that the rest of the brains use are actually produced in the gut. Evolutionarily, that one comes first. Why? Because an organism that doesn't feed doesn't reproduce and it dies. And so that should evolve first. And that one never left because feeding is still important. So you still have it. Then you get this cephalization process, this neuro material that builds up evolutionarily over time near the sensory organs. Why are the eyes and ears and nose all out at the head? You want them in the direction you're going because you want to sense what's in the direction you're going. So we get this cephalization process through evolution. And then, hey, you might as well process it there instead of sending it down to the gut, which is far away. So you start doing processing there. And you get the midbrain, which is doing your heartbeat, your lungs, and your should I be afraid or not, your fight or flight, which is tied to a whole complex stuff of the endocrine system, which is co-evolving at the same time. But that fight or flight, that limbic brain, that emotional brain, is the next that evolves. And that's what keeps an organism alive, because this is dangerous. I should get out of here. Now we start getting more complex parts, and we get the cerebrum and cerebellum coming together. And the cerebellum does complex voluntary motor activities. If you're driving your car and you're thinking about dinner or your partner or your dog, more likely, and you're thinking about it as you're driving down and you're going 70 kilometers an hour and you're taking corners and you're going through intersections and all that is good and you don't die, but you weren't paying attention. You kind of look and go, oh, I'm almost home. I didn't even realize it. Does that happen to you?
Yeah.
Sure. That's your cerebellum. It's a separate brain. It's doing its own thing and it's having a good time. And it communicates with the cerebrum. You have a left and a right cerebral hemisphere. We know that if you cut out the corpus callosum, the connection between those two, they operate independently just fine, and they do different things. In fact, one of them does the written spoken kinds of language things better, and one of them processes visual better. So if you want to talk to one hemisphere, you might do it better visually. Because of the corpus callosum, we just think of them as one, but they're really separate. So then you got to go, well, what's this conscious thing? When I think of who Tim Lewis is, which brain is that? That's going to be the interesting question to figure out. It's certainly the cerebrum. It's certainly the left and right hemispheres, probably collectively. But you know how sometimes you have impulsive thoughts? Where did that thought come from? Maybe that came from the cerebrum. Maybe it came from the cerebellum. Maybe it came from the other hemisphere that we don't know because we think of it as a unit. At one level of biology, it's useful just to go, you have a brain, it's in your head, and it's got separate parts. But when you really want to think about control and behaviors, the dog fight or flight is not coming from the cerebral cortex going, I wonder if I should fight now. It's happening in the limbic brain, the amygdala in the brain short circuits, it sends it to the limbic brain, and it functions differently. And if you think of them as different units, you start to go, oh, which brain am I training right now? I'm using food as my reward. I'm doing a lot of enteric brain training on top of whichever hemispheres I'm working with. I think, and this is one of the things I'm really trying to, I want to put together for a talk that I'm doing in a couple of weeks out in California, how you might train differently for the different brains if you think of them as separate. It's more comforting to think of Tim Lewis, me, is this thing I'm in control of, but I know I'm not in control because I do things I don't want to do. And why? Because it's not one brain that's in charge. So I really want you to think more broadly about 5 brains, not one, and why it's training is even harder than you think because you're not reaching for one brain, you're reaching for multiples.
Yeah. Sometimes everything, it kind of looks simple, but if you really break it down to like the science of how everything is actually working, then you're kind of like, no wonder this dog is struggling, or no wonder this person is doing what they're doing. It actually, you know, it makes sense why this is kind of happening.
And it go further. We even as humans have only been, you know, cities didn't get invented until maybe 10,000 years ago. And the modern city really is in the last 100 years. No selection for that modern environment. And with dogs, which are wolves, certainly no selection for the modern city. You never evolved to drive at 100 kilometers an hour because there was no driving and nothing moved that fast unless you fell off a cliff. If you fell off a cliff, you'd experience it, but then you'd die, so you'd never learn from the event. Yet we do these things all the time. We never evolved to do them. We don't know what they really do to our brains. By doing these things, we never evolved to handle. So we take a dog and we stick it in an environment full of smells and sounds that it can't possibly be adapted to. And then we're like, why aren't you paying attention to me? I got the turkey treats in my hand. And the dog is smelling 7 other dogs that are coming in. They're hearing fans and motors and things we don't hear. And then of course that's all filtered through their temperament, right? I'm a guard dog. I go to alert because of those strange sounds. I'm a hunting dog. That sounds like prey. I better go check it out. No wonder it's difficult. It's a wonder we train anybody at anything.
Yeah, it's so true. And you just saying that actually reminds me of like a lot of like agility dogs that, you know, people are so quick. They just want to train all the agility stuff, but they don't actually do the behavior stuff. So I know of a lot of dogs that say, you know, they're great in training on their own, but then as soon as you put them in the ring and there's loads of distractions and there's other dogs and other smells and so on, the dog is then not focused, it's missing obstacles and so on. And then the owner's like, what the hell? And getting like super frustrated, but they actually haven't, like you say, just gone back to, you know, training that.
And I'm going to add to that. Just because you like agility doesn't mean your dog does.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And people, I got this dog to be an agility dog. You know what? Maybe you didn't get an agility dog. Maybe your dog likes nose work. And if your dog likes nose work, maybe you ought to modify if you want to have that Angelique, you commented down that path of, you know, people don't want to adjust their life to the dog. They want the dog to adjust to theirs. It's a lot easier for you to adjust to your dogs. My dog likes nose work better than agility. Maybe I go, hey, maybe it's not paying attention in the ring because it just doesn't like the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Or again, it's the reward. So one of my friends who's an agility trainer, actually, she said to me that she had a whinge at one of her clients the other day because the owner wanted to use a ball, but the dog didn't want a ball. The dog wanted food, but and the dog runs so much faster on food, but because the owner wanted to use the ball, the dog was much slower. And my friend had like a conniption there. It was just, so again, it's so true. Like, that's yeah, so true what you're saying.
I've seen people, I've met, talked with people who are like, but I bought this particular toy because I knew my dog would love it and he won't play with it. I'm like, maybe you should play with it because your dog doesn't like it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I don't like chocolate, for example, so that for me, if
Wait, like what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we're done. Gotta go.
but I'm great because I'm never going to steal anyone's chocolate. So I'm
Well,
like,
there you go.
so that for me would be really aversive if someone bought me chocolate. So it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? It's
And we do the okay. People will say, "How does that taste to you?" Well, there's no evidence that it would taste the same to you, right? We know certain things are pretty obvious; they taste different to people, but probably everything. I like the taste of this food, chocolate. You don't like chocolate. It's probably not. It's probably because your chemoreceptors bring it in differently than mine, so that mine go to a reward center and yours don't. And that's just an individual variation that comes in with how the biological package comes out of that genetic environment kind of mix. So yeah, finding that match between you and the dog's interests and the dog's rewards, because we have dogs. We have some dogs that are more play motivated, some that are more food motivated, and if you don't find what works for them, just because it worked for you doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then, so this is off topic now, already, but I got asked this question today, so I thought actually it would be a good question to ask you. So, still on the brain, kind of. If you look at dogs, what is the difference between an emotion and a feeling? And looking at the emotions we think dogs can experience, can they experience things like jealousy and guilt and yeah.
Okay. The second one is easier to answer than the first.
Okay.
Because in order to feel guilt, you need a moral system. And there's no reason to believe anything in nature would have a moral system unless it is a social animal that can communicate those, primates. Probably we're the only primates that do it from kind of this morals. So in the terms of guilt implies I know a standard of right and wrong and feel bad about doing it. And probably dogs, again, I don't even know what you experience in your head. So probably dogs are experiencing more about, was that rewarded behavior, not rewarded behavior? Is it a threat? Is it not a threat? I got rewarded when I acted this way, I'm going to do it, but not in terms of guilt. There's something like jealousy out there, because there was a really interesting study done where, one dog got one reward for the same thing and another dog got 3 rewards, and there was actual cortisol difference and there was stress differences. And that's really interesting. It's hard to know if that would be perceived in a I got cheated or just I want more. Hard to know. Do they feel emotions? And I'm not defining emotions, and I don't really know that. So that's the first question. I'm not going to define feelings and emotions. But we know, for example, anyone who's lived with a dog knows they can be happy, they can be sad, they can be depressed. When we have to put a dog down, the other dogs react the same way I do. Really sad, really missing the other. I'm sure I layer more associations on it, but there's they're a mammal probably, and there's evidence that, there's a really interesting study with rats where they have rats in a cage, and one of the 2 rats is in a tube, and they feed just the rat outside the tube, and this rat now starts sharing food with the rat in the tube. If you swap out rats, they're less likely to share with a rat they're not familiar with, but it's still a generosity of sharing. And presumably something on the order of compassion for this one I got to know and was familiar with versus the one I didn't. So there've been studies like that that show that, yes, and when I was a student in college, at university, the teacher said to me basically, except for humans, no animals have emotions. And biologists like that idea because if we're going to do experiments on animals, we don't want to think, oh my God, they might not agree to this. Clearly mammals, most vertebrates, I mean, we know fish feel pain when they get a hook in their mouth when people are out fishing, and they respond with the same kind of stress levels that we would getting hooked. And pain is evolutionarily really valuable, right? Keeps you from doing things that shouldn't be done and recognizing when a body part's been damaged. So we shouldn't be surprised that those basic emotions that go with it, fear, empathy, those kind of things all come into play. The evidence is, I mean, I couldn't prove you feel emotions, right? There's no tangible way I could prove either of you feel real emotions, share in this kind of joy and sorrow that I have with dogs. You act like you do. Dogs act like they do. All the evidence is, yes, they have feeling emotion in a broad way. They certainly have intelligence and varying intelligence, and some dogs are happier and some are less happy. Some are more extroverted, some are more introverted. And all of that would be adaptive, and we shouldn't be surprised that it's there. But I can't get too nuanced in the labeling because it's hard to know. Do dogs build a philosophy of life? Do they build right and wrong? Do they have a suite of morals? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, and whilst we're kind of talking about emotion and stuff, we want to ask you about stress and trigger stacking and stuff, because those are kind of very commonly used terms in things like when we're dealing with aggression and reactivity in dogs. And so can you talk a little bit about what is going on in the brain when a dog experiences a trigger that they are perhaps fearful of or anxious of?
Sure. So I'm gonna use an example to define what I'm gonna use the word trigger to mean.
Yeah, it's probably different actually.
So in your brain, you have a pair of structures called amygdala, and they're basically checking smells and sight and sound as they're coming into the brain and immediately looking for warnings. We'll call those triggers. And they can be things that are hardwired. The smell of smoke seems to be a hardwired mammalian trigger of danger. But it can also be, this one was a very dangerous situation in the past, and you learn it, and the amygdala incorporates that so that when the right set of inputs come in, we skip that whole cortical part of the brain and we jump right over to that limbic part of the brain. We short circuit it because it saves time. There's some fun videos out there with cats and dogs when they see like a coiled rope and they'll jump back like it's really terrible. Evolutionarily, it's better to be scared of a rope thinking it's a snake and be wrong, no big deal, than to think a snake is a rope, step on it, get bitten and die, right? It's always better to be cautious than to ignore a threat. So the brain is wired. When you get that threat signal, you now send chemical signals from the brain, for example, from the hypothalamus to the adrenal gland, and hypothalamus to the pituitary to the adrenal gland. Just chemicals in your bloodstream that are sending out signals that send out signals to your whole body. That it also affects the nervous system. You have a sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, kind of gas pedal and brake, hurry up, slow down. That fight or flight kicks in, and things like you get more tunnel vision, you stop digesting food, you focus on the threat, because it is way better to focus on the threat and not need to than to fail to focus on the threat, right? So you get this whole suite of chemical and neurological changes in the body that happen when a threat occurs, and it happens faster than you can consciously think because that's the quicker you do it, the more likely you are to survive a threat. Great. Now, the half-life of cortisol, which is one of the chemicals that gets produced in stress, and says to the body, we're under stress. The whole body's getting this message. This is a stressful situation. Be careful. The half-life of that is something like 20 minutes, which means it takes hours to clear out of your system. So I get a threat environment. It's going to be hours before the chemical changes settle me back down. And I probably, in an urban environment or in a high input environment, I'm getting stressed every half hour. I may never get to de-stress. So a dog, this is why working at a job you hate creates chronic stress. You're constantly in that fight or flight mode. You never get to come down from it. You never get to rest and recuperate. Your nervous system never gets to rest and recuperate. It's just bathed in cortisol all the time. And yeah, there's more chemistry than just the cortisol, but it's easy to just focus on one. So you're bathed in the cortisol. It lasts for a while. Well, think about, there's a phrase that I didn't invent. The bite that happened today started at dinner last night. Because you start the chemistry from a pleasant feeding or an unpleasant feeding, what arguments happened around the table, what, or wherever did the dog run in? People will say, my dog did this. And I'm like, well, tell me what happened in detail over the last 4 hours. I'm like, what? Training has to happen within 15 seconds. But the endocrine system kicks in for hours at a time. And when the endocrine stress is one of those things that kicks in, I may not know why I feel stressed, but my amygdala is signaling stress and I'm bathed in those stress chemicals. So they carry on for a long period of time. And dogs, mammals in general, are more aggressive when they're bathed in cortisol and adrenaline. You're in a fight or flight mode, you're quicker to lash out than if you're calm and your body's saying, hey, everything's peaceful, everything's good. Did that get to where you were going?
Yes, it just made me think of like 5 more questions as you were talking. When I was calling them. And so obviously in dog training and behavior, where you're always, well, you're kind of taught that you want the dog to be like under that threshold, so under that fight or flight response, so that they can, stay calm and they can learn. Can dogs learn when they are at that fight or flight response? Do you
Can
think?
you learn when you're under a high stress environment? Sure. Does it stay as well? No. Because in a fight or flight situation, you're certainly still learning. You're learning about that fight or flight situation, right? So if I'm getting attacked, I don't just like stop having memories. And I'll process them that night while I'm sleeping and start to figure out what they all mean. And I may develop, like a post-traumatic stress disorder because enough of that happened over and over that it got wired into me or my dog. Can you learn in that environment? Yeah, but you might not be learning the lessons you want learned, right? I'm now under this cortisol stress fight or flight mode. I can still learn to do obstacles and agility, but I might not want to. It might become associated with bad motivation. It might become associated with something that's actually getting in the way of my fleeing the situation. Your brain does really weird things. We know from learning studies that you will associate memories not just with what you want them associated with, but with some other things. So for example, studies are often done with alcohol or with peppermint. If you, as a student, have just a little bit of alcohol in you, or a peppermint, so presumably other flavors, but this is what they've been done with. Let's just use the peppermint. I suck on the peppermint while I'm learning biochemistry. I'm learning the Krebs cycle and some godforsaken biochemical reaction that we make all biology students use, and only the biochemists really need it. It's wonderful and amazing. It's really tedious to learn. But I'm sucking on peppermint when I do it. Some of the steps of the cycle might well be associated with the peppermint candy and not with the previous cycles. And the solution to that is if you suck on peppermint candies when you study, you better suck on peppermint candies when you take the test. Because some of those, likewise, you should study in the room you're going to take the test in, because some of the memories will get associated with that light fixture and some will get associated with that window. We don't know why, we don't know how that all works. So when we're teaching a dog, in a learning environment, they may well take some of that lesson. And unfortunately, some of that lesson gets associated with something we didn't really want it associated with. It might be stress. It might be somebody standing nearby. It might be a dog that smells really good over there, not just distracting them, but actually becoming the associative key in the brain to unlocking that memory. And then with the next time they smell that, that whole memory gets unlocked, right? If you ever smelt something and right away you could think of a place or an event, it's that kind of an idea that we associate thoughts with. The key to pulling them out isn't always what we want the key to be. And that happens with it, no doubt happens in any mammals that are learning. All that is it means make your training environment as consistent as possible, make it as close to whatever the real thing is. An agility trial, if your dog is doing behavior type things, obedience type things, you make the training environment as close to that as possible. If you know you're about to go to a trial at a place that's really noisy, it's got a lot of air handlers, train for a while in a place with noisy air handlers just to help make those associations. The more you can do, and then recognize you can't control everything. So just the biggest lesson I would want people to hear is give yourself a little break. It's not necessarily bad training. You may be doing everything perfectly, but the brain just doesn't function as neatly as we want it to.
And then I want to ask about something, and I did ask about this before as well, but I'm curious to hear about different opinions on this. So something that gets recommended a lot here, sort of in our area, and where I did like a little bit of studies with regards to canine behavior, is what people call like a cortisol holiday. So that would be like a month for like a reactive dog of like not going out the house, just doing trick training at home, things like that. Do you think that is necessary for such a long period of time?
Cortisol holiday. I love the idea. I have zero data to go by what I'm going to say, except to say that cortisol clears in about, biologically, we don't know what the right level of cortisol to clear. Certainly 24 hours would clear whatever cortisol was there. How long do you have to go to get the cell signalers? I'm looking for a different word. To get the reception sites to decrease, because the only value of a particularly long holiday would be if, say, the neurotransmitter receivers or the hormone receivers actually decreased in number, so you changed what was on the surface of a cell. And I don't know if 30 days would be long enough. So certainly some non-zero amount of time would be good. Could you ever fully take a holiday from a basic hormone in your body? I don't know. I do know that in humans, vacations matter. You take a holiday from work, you're away for a week, you're away for 2 weeks, you get more rested, and you're able to come back and face something. So I'm intrigued by the idea. Would it have to be, I would bet an hour is better than a minute, and a day is better than an hour, and a week is better than a day. And at some point you get diminishing returns. I don't know where it would be. 30 days? That does seem like an awfully long time. But you could set up the experiment. This would be a tough experiment. It'd be kind of cool, right? You need 2 groups of 30 dogs. One group is randomly assigned to which group, and one group is going to get cortisol holiday, and the other one's not. And you're going to bring them back together in 30 days, and you're going to measure how they respond in situations. It would be fascinating to know if it worked. This is a good example of science versus reality. I always like my dog takes some supplements that there's not good science behind, but I seem to see a difference. I feel better about it. And in 10 years, somebody will fund a study and we'll know if it really worked. In the interim, my dog's only got 10 years. I'm not going to wait for the study. If there's no evidence of harm, I might just go do that. This would be one of those situations where I don't think there's enough data for anybody to know. And so different trainers put together different packages of ideas of this is what I think you ought to do. maybe the 30-day cortisol holiday doesn't do anything for the dog, but it does for the handler,
Yeah.
right? You may, so that'd be a whole nother study. You'd have to swap out handlers and see if it was the handler that benefited by the cortisol holiday versus the dog. I love it. Great set of experiments. Somebody wants to drop a couple $1 million on me, I'll go do the study myself. It'd be fascinating. And whether it's the handler or the dog, I don't know that it really matters. If the handler felt better about it, I'm a big fan of placebos. I tell my doctors that up front. I said, if you think this is all in my head and a placebo is going to work, I'll pay for it. Don't worry about it. I don't think it's fraud. I think we know you can lie to your brain. We know it works. You can openly lie going, I know this is false. You tell yourself, I think I can do this. No. You know you can do this. And pretty soon you've convinced yourself. So even if that holiday is just a lie to the handler and it makes him feel better, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know how realistic. You'd have to have a pretty controllable life to be able to have that kind of time.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think, I don't know why I think about that a lot, but it's one of the things I do.
I like it. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by the idea. I do like the idea of making your dog's life less stressful. Now, if I live in a high rise in Miami, or London, and I've got my dog in a high rise in London, and that dog is smelling all the other hundreds of dogs in the same high rise, and they're hearing all of the air conditioners and all of the blowers and all of the motors down on the street. There may be no such thing as a cortisol holiday. I live out in the country on 2.5 hectares of land that's wooded and surrounded by a 800 hectare state park. I could probably give my dog a pretty good holiday.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, my border collies, I seem to move house to give my border collies like a bigger garden or a bigger house. Like everything is for my collies.
Right? That's
definitely.
think about that. And then you're dealing with clientele who are like, one of my favorite dog behaviorists is Sue Sternberg. She's a dear friend of mine. One of the first times I went to hear her talk, somebody asked, I have a dog that barks every time a car drives down the road in front of the house. He jumps up on the couch, looks out the window, and barks. And Sue says, have you thought of closing the curtains? No, we can't do that. That's really important to have light in our house. Have you thought of moving the couch so the dog can't jump up there and see? No. The room is perfectly well arranged. Have you thought of putting gates up to keep the dog away? No. We don't want the gates in the house that would interrupt and everything. Well, if you don't change anything, nothing's going to change. And you get people who aren't even willing to move their couch, whereas you're going to buy a different house and a different vehicle, and you're going to live in a different county just to make it better for your dog.
Just
and there's that mismatch.
Yeah, definitely. And like you spoke about like those people in high-rise flats in like say upstate New York, for example, with their working line border collie, and like I'm thinking of that and I'm thinking that would be like my male border collie's idea of hell, like literally. Like, and like how can you get those dogs to recover from like if they are seeing trigger after trigger after trigger on like a constant daily basis? Like how can you help those dogs more, because that is more challenging than if, like you say, you live in a rural area and you can just let them decompress. And
that's a great question. What's your next one? No, this is like the $1 million question, or $1 million question for London. That's not the right exchange rate, by the way.
£1 million is more, a little bit more.
Right. So, I almost said something I would live to regret having said.
I'll go and say it.
Not all environments are right for all dogs.
Yeah, completely.
Not in some environments probably shouldn't have dogs. And you live in that environment, and I don't want to deprive you of having a dog. And what I want to say to you is you need to move. And that's a privilege of wealth, or it's a privilege of convenience, or it's a privilege of job, or it's a privilege of, a whole bunch of things to be able to say, put your dog first. That's what I want to say.
Mhm.
Put your dog first. You're in that environment. You want to make it better for him. Get him out of that environment.
Yeah.
We can't do that. That's just not realistic. And that's not, I mean, and the joy that dogs bring to those people in an environment that's not really well suited for dogs. In a talk that Sue Sternberg and I are doing together, sorry, I keep bumping my desk. In a talk that Sue Sternberg and I are going to do in California in a couple of weeks, we show some footage. She took some footage in Spain in an urban environment. And there are certainly some breeds of dogs or some mixes of dogs that do better in that environment than other. So another response is maybe get a dog that can handle this cacophony of smells and sounds better instead of the breed you picked that was never adapted to that environment. So part of how you help it is you think you get more thoughtful about your next dog, but people still want help with this dog. And how do I make it better in this dog?
Yeah.
And you're not going to get rid of the smells. You're not going to get rid of the noises. So then you have to make sure that, those encounters with you are the least stressful things in the world. Not getting mad at your dog, not getting upset with your dog, providing all kinds of positive rewards, because that background is just not going away. And you just have to, as mammalian brains habituate over time, they have to just get used to the background, which in some dogs doesn't happen, and get used to this elevated level of cortisol, which may affect their health in the long run, but becomes the baseline norm. And if it's a stressful environment, then about the only thing you can really do is make sure all of the time with you is lower stress and more fun, so that you're the shelter from the storm. And that's that dog human bond you work on with everybody that you're training, right? That you need to be the most fun, interesting, safe space for them. And that's the best you're going to do in that environment but that takes time, right? And the people who might want a dog that I can ignore 20 hours out of the day, you're not helping that dog. It's you need to put more time in being that safe space, so around you the storm doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah. And it just goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about genetics and breeds and how you can't always change everything.
There are dogs that seem to do well in really bad, messy environments.
Yeah.
One of those, should be your next choice. Getting a border collie, for example, and we'll go to that one because we have that common thread. We'll go to a border collie and people are like, well, I exercise him 20 minutes a day. This is a border collie. 20 minutes an hour would be okay. But then you got to do that for 12 hours out of the day. You said that at the very beginning, it's a mismatch between the dog's needs and what the person wants to give. And part of that's going to be the environment you've got them in, right? Are you giving them enough exercise that they can relax, and enough meaningful work so they can relax, and that background mess is less important? But if you're not giving them enough work, so they're stressed, or they're not giving them enough brain interaction, so they're stressed, plus that background is stressed, you've just made it worse.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like my Pomeranian would be fine in New York. He would love New York. He loves everyone, everything. Like, but my colleagues would hate it.
Yeah, and so that recognition is important. This dog would love this. This dog would hate that. And recognize that difference. Most people, I don't think, even go that far.
Yeah. I also want to ask about how trauma can change a brain, right? Like, does it make the brain less good at figuring out that this is safe and this is not safe? Like, instead of realizing this situation is unsafe, but, everything else might still be cool, we kind of get a thing of generalization that maybe things are not safe.
And remember that evolutionarily, it's better to think it's unsafe and be wrong than to think it's safe and be wrong. So the brain defaults to learning to be careful. It even in like relationship stuff with you and me, and we're talking, if you give me a negative feedback, the ratio for us to get along as friends and to have this be a positive relationship is something like 15-1. You have to give me 15 good bids for a to offset a negative, right? You're around somebody, you're like, I just don't like that person. Why? Because they gave you a higher ratio of negative feedback. You learned it. And once you learn it, it's really hard to unlearn completely, because that learning that in the wild would have saved your life.
Mm.
It's why things like post-traumatic stress disorder, which represent real changes in brains, real changes in brain structures, are so difficult, because learning that is evolutionarily an advantage. And in the wild, learning once that when a cougar comes around to attack, large puma concaller, or a large cat, comes around to attack, and I have to be wary of it. You only want to learn that lesson once, and you want that to carry with you. Evolutionarily, it's better to carry that with you the entire rest of your life, because you may only encounter that wild cat one more time, and you want to be ready. It's really hard to unlearn those risky, dangerous, negative things. And yes, they do set up a brain framework after that that is really hard to undo. And I mean, it's tragic. You can have a wonderful therapy dog. Somebody's aggressive dog attacks your therapy dog, and the
Yeah.
entire career of that therapy dog could be over because of that one encounter. And it's tragic, and it's terrible, and desensitizing it from, and there are some good dog trainers who have programs out there like BAT,
Yeah.
where you're working on desensitizing the dog and getting it used to those difficult. And can some dogs get past? Yeah, absolutely. And can most dogs benefit by some of that desensitizing that goes with it? Sure. But you can't completely undo that, because evolutionarily keeping that in there was so valuable.
Mm, mm. And
Yeah.
then, like, would that be the case of, like, so say thunderstorms, for example, like here in Joburg, they are ridiculous. Like, I was terrified of them when I first moved over here. I'm still sometimes like, a bit scared. And we have a few months in winter where we don't have storms, and then the storms start come October time. And so,
Mhm.
like, and again, thinking of my sensitive male border collie who has loads of feelings about things, is that the same kind of thing going on in the brain? Like, because we'll get to a certain point and then the storm then just gets so loud that, I have to put him in his crate or his safe place for him to kind of feel calm.
Probably. It's hard to know exactly, and people have tried to study what's going on in the brain. It's hard to, thunderstorms are hard to time. Um, but it's a really good example, right? You get flashes of light that are really distracting. To a dog, you get unassociated sounds that are really significant. You also get pressure changes that are
Yeah, yeah.
associated with it.
Mhm,
Air pressure changes, even a thunderclap will bring pressure changes.
mhm.
So there's a lot going on, and there's um, some dogs seem sensitive even as puppies, but more and more, a higher percentage of older dogs
Mm.
um, are thunderphobic. Um, and we believe that that's just you're more and more associating these uncomfortable sounds, because remember, dogs hear low frequencies better than we do, and they hear about 20 times better than we do. So we hear a little rumble, they hear a loud rumble. We hear a loud crash, they hear an amazingly loud crash. So they're hearing different, louder, and over time they're just, it's not like the dog is looking at the telly and going, hey, there's a storm coming. Their world just at random times gets pressure changes, loud sounds, and lightning. We don't know if they understand the thunderstorm concept at all, right? Most people are inside with their dogs when the thunderstorm's occurring. So why would the dog know that this is unstable air or a front coming through, right? We can do all of that and rationalize it away. We can't teach our dogs about thunderstorms. They just know that at odd times, the world gets loud, the world starts having flashing lights, the people around me seem more stressed. Why wouldn't they learn to become more concerned? Um, and then do you guys have thunder shirts where you are, where
Yeah.
people wrap
Yeah.
dogs?
Yeah.
There've been some interesting controlled studies of those. They seem to help the handler more than the dog. The idea behind them is biologically really sound. You
Yeah.
get swaddled in clothing and it causes more endorphins to be released.
Mhm.
Doesn't seem to hold up under experimentation. Um, the being held tightly doesn't seem to be that important, but it does seem to have a good effect on the dog partners, the people.
That's interesting.
So I'm a big fan of thunder shirts, because if it makes you less stressed, that's gonna make your dog less stressed. But they don't seem to offset the horror of the world suddenly exploding around you.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's like
How would it be any
effect.
different than random artillery shells to you, right? All
Yeah.
of a sudden, loud noises and flashes, and you don't know where they're coming from and where they're going, and then they're gone. If you look at cultures before they had science, thunderstorms were the gods being angry. They were scary events. We would do sacrifices. They're terrifying until someone explains to you, maybe you're not going to die from this. And we
Yeah.
don't get to do that with our dogs.
Yeah.
That's part of remembering to see the world from your dog's point of view. From your dog's point of view, it's not a thunderstorm. It's just loud noises and flashing lights at odd times.
Definitely.
How can people then help their dogs be more resilient, or how can we help our dogs be more optimistic about life?
I don't know about optimistic about life. The dogs really focus a lot on rewards. There's a book I'm reading right now, The Culture Clash, that a friend recommended
Yeah.
to me.
I love that book. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
I disagree. So like she's got a list of top 10 things we know about real dogs. And one of the things that she has in there is that there's not right or wrong. There's not right or wrong. It's safe or not safe. And I don't think that's right. I don't think it's safe or not safe. I think it's rewarded, not rewarded. Dogs do lots of risky things when they get rewarded for doing it. It's a nuance. I think it's a fabulous book. I wish I'd have read it 10 years ago. But the rewards are big. So if you could predict when that peal of thunder was coming and you could be treating or playing with your dog, so it's all a fun event, that's going to come over time to at least be less stressful, right? Now, evolutionarily, responding to thunder and taking cover keeps the wolf alive. You're probably never going to get rid of that completely, right? It would not be good for a wolf to be out hunting in the middle of a thunderstorm because it's dangerous. So responding by seeking cover would be selected for. So at some level, an animal that can seek cover would, because it'd be beneficial. And we're probably never going to get completely past that. But you can at least make the event more fun and less stressful, knowing what your dog needs for rewards and then using that so that the period of the event is more fun. It becomes to be associated with play. If your dog likes to herd sheep, and that might be a problem because you don't want to go out in a thunderstorm herding sheep, but it could be for play, could be for food. But you're not going to move away from it completely. How do you make a dog more optimistic? Give it more to look forward to. Right? If time with you is fun, that's going to be for example, at least the dog that's something to look forward to. Give your dog more joy in its life. I don't think that's a terribly unique idea. Bring more joy to your dog. Your dog's going to have more to look forward to and going to be happier. Dogs, this goes back to what we said at the very beginning, right? It's the match the dog's activity level to its needs. Give the dog what it wants, not like give the dog what it wants, like, oh, you can do whatever you want, but giving it good, meaningful work, giving it a useful experience, giving it fun, controlled, trained. Evolutionarily, wolves were in pretty constrained groups. That does not mean use the dominance things that wolves used. Those don't work nearly as well. Positive rewards work way, 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 way better. It's not to say negative rewards or punishments don't work. They do. Unfortunately, they don't necessarily teach the lessons we want. They don't teach them very fast. But making things rewarding is going to give your dog more to look forward to. But there's still going to be some depressed dogs because of their temperament and their biochemistry, and they're probably not going to be happy.
No, definitely. Okay, I'm just really conscious of your time. Can I just ask one more question? So, yeah, I've heard you speak.
Fire away.
I've heard you speak in other interviews about your list of 18 items that contribute to aggression. Can you just maybe quickly summarize them?
Okay, sure. There are things that go into broadly writ behaviors, right? So we've already talked about genetics. but we also know about epigenetics, which is the methylation of some of those genes, turning them on and off, that happens in the uterine environment. So it's not just you don't just want the right dog, but you want the right mom. And there's evidence that it's really at least 2 generations. So you want the right grandmother as well to have had really good experiences, positive, low stress, low cortisol experiences all the time the fetus is being carried. It matters if you're a female puppy in the uterus, with 2 males around you, you're getting more testosterone, and that changes your behaviors later in life than if you're a male surrounded by, than if you're a female surrounded by 2 females. They're all sharing estrogen. So that uterine environment matters. Then then nutrition's going to matter, and health's going to matter. The puppy training environment, all the way up the line to what was the stress environment of the last 12 hours, and what's the immediate reward that happened right in the first 8/10 of a second after whatever event, aggression in the case that I'm often talking about. Was it positively rewarded? Almost always yes, because the dog goes, and the prey item, the person, the other dog, whatever, backs up. Boom, I just got rewarded. And so, and then there's reward that comes after that. So there's all of those things, very few of which you can control. The handler's stress level you can control because your dog reads your stress. And that's one of the 18 is being able to, is your stress level. When your cortisol levels are up higher, probably, I don't know the mechanism. I don't know if we have the mechanism identified. Like, I don't know if I'm giving off pheromones or the dog is reading my face, but the dog becomes more stressed if I'm more stressed. So one of the things that affects that behavior or aggression or learning is my own stress level. So learning to calm down, to be less stressed and more confident also affects my dog's behavior. So behavior is this incredibly complex thing. And give yourself a break because you can't control most of it. You might control some of it for your next dog. You might hope to control some of it for your next dog by the breed and the uterine environment, et cetera. But the ones you can control is your stress, your focus on the dog, your joy in what's going on, and the rewards your dog is getting leading in the hours leading up to that training session.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, all of those things come in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Leads on to a whole nother discussion, but we'll end it here because
Yes. It's kind of like we get stuff done in spite of all of
Well, so that's a really good summary thing, right? So there's so many things you can't control. You don't give up. The mammalian organism, the dog and you both evolved to learn in situations and to adapt to those situations. The whole reason we have a brain is to cut through all those other influences and still give you a chance at the right behaviors associated with these rewards, and the rewards are broadly writ. And the fact that we do successfully train dogs and we do successfully train people shows how valuable that focus is and how good that prefrontal cortex is at filtering and learning what needs to be learned despite all those other things. So don't throw up your hands and say, oh, I can't, there's too many things that come into play. Still, what matters is your bond with your dog, the dog's bond with you. Are you giving them appropriate activities to who they are, which is based on breed and all those kind of things? And yeah, you can be successful despite all of those things. You will be if you're persistent over time. Did that bring it back for you?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. And we're gonna stop asking questions. Where can people find out more about you?
No, they don't want to. So I do a lot of talks, so there's stuff out there on the web. If I were better at marketing myself, I would have my own. I do have a web page I don't do anything with. I would be better at marketing myself. I'm too excited about learning and doing more things to be good at marketing that. I do have a book, The Biology of Dogs, which is really behavior is a part of it, and but it's more the broad writ of biology from evolution to cell biology and endocrine system. I think everybody ought to read it so they know the parts of the dog and they know what's going on. Sooner or later, I'm probably a year out at least. And by the way, that Biology of Dogs should be coming out in in an Audible version.
Cool.
Any day now. I've been working with the publisher on that.
Okay.
So I guess looking for YouTube things that other people have recorded, inviting me like this. I'm so grateful to you guys for giving me a chance to talk, and to ask really good questions and to have a really good conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, well, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate your time. And we'll put like the links to your book and website in the show notes and stuff. And when's your new book coming out?
Well, I'm chapter 3 into what's going to be 14.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah.
It's actually, my plan is 18 chapters to cover those 18 things, plus some more background ones. There's maybe like 20 some chapters, shorter chapters, but very topical to those things. And I've done the introduction in the first couple of chapters, and once I get my head fully around those, the others will come quickly. I don't want to put a timeline on it. My goal was to have it done over a year ago, and I'm nowhere near where I wanted to be. So
okay, we'll have to wait.
It's because it's so complicated, but it's so interesting.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I can't wait for it to come out. So cool. Well, thank you so much, Tim. We really, really appreciate your time.
I'm very grateful to you for the time as well. Thanks so much.